Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming to Never Not Here. My name is Richard Miller, and we're really blasting out the episodes. You'd say if I get to talk 2 or 3 times a week, then I'm starting to get happy. So we were wanting to find out exactly what all this talking's good for. So then a lot of people are presenting themselves and presenting ideas kind of as a way of life. And we're talking to those people and saying, well, does it work? I mean, I know that I like talking to a lot of people, but in another way, I'm still believing in my beliefs. And I open a little bit, but I don't know if it makes a radical change or if just talking is, I guess we all believe in it because otherwise we wouldn't be communicating. So today, please help me welcome Danny Martin. So, hi, Danny.
Hey, Richard. How are you?
So I was reading up a little bit about Cross River Connections.
Uh-huh.
How do you say it with an X? Connexions?
Exactly. It kind of gives it a Belfast accent.
And I like it says, the art of dialogue. So then I'm always thinking that maybe I'm doing the art of dialogue here. And then you're saying with creative outcomes. So then that's what I'm wondering. Is there any creative outcomes, or are we just, I don't know, it's not enough. I want more creative outcomes. And I'm saying, how could that be? Can we fine tune our dialogue and really make creative outcomes the norm instead of like, maybe it's not the norm now. Maybe it's just,
Well, maybe
rare.
one thought that comes to my mind is that the word dialogue is used rather easily to kind of suggest that all you need is good intention. And in other words, we just sit down, we have a chat, and creative outcomes happen.
Yeah, well, dialogue kind of means give and take, right? Or
Well,
I've always said that it means like no, not so much expectation, because otherwise it's a sermon if you have a lot of expectations, right?
well, let me approach it in a kind of a little bit more of a formal way. Even the word itself comes from 2 Greek words, dia, which means through, and logos, which is meaning. So the art of dialogue is to interact in a way that allows meaning to come through. It's to participate in the unfolding of meaning. And just for a second, let me distinguish it, say, from 2 other things which are like it, but quite different. Debate, for example, comes from the Latin word debattere, which means literally to beat down. And so we're probably more accustomed to that. And often when we talk about dialogue, we're really talking about debate. And sometimes debate is appropriate for whatever the interaction is. The second word is which is comparable, or is discussion. Now that comes from another Latin 2 words, discutere, which means to cut in two. And so the focus there is analysis. And clearly there's time for discussion. And when discussion is most appropriate, you're looking at material, facts, and so forth. But whenever you're trying to explore something more complex, like human beings and like positions that we hold, there's much more going on than just the data. There's underpinning assumptions and beliefs and values that we have that we're mostly not even conscious of. So dialogue really is an attempt to speak to each other at that level. And when we do, something else happens.
In a way, discutere, to cut. I mean, that is the process of the mind, is to, the finer and finer science gets, the more specialized people get. In universities, specialties, there's so many specialties now, there's even a specialty to put them all together called the generalist or something, like the guy that has to...
I think the emphasis in all of those things, though, and understandably and not inappropriately, is the mind. And the mind is a very important part of all conversation and all human interaction. But you and I know that there's always much more going on. When human beings are talking, there's emotions, for example. There are feelings, there are biases, there are prejudices, there are ways in which there's an internal conversation going on about how I'm kind of triggered by, say, something you say. I find myself having an internal conversation Um, all of this is part of a human interaction. As soon as you start this conversation, of course, you realize too that even when we have good intentions, okay, well, let's say we're going to talk about these things, we're going to explore our assumptions. We have developed, I say we, and I because I include myself who teaches this stuff and has been for years, we've developed such amazing bad habits of interacting. But for example, the way we listen, we don't really listen in order to understand. In fact, I'm probably often just waiting for you to take a breath in order to jump in with my perspective. Or I'm listening, selecting only the data that kind of affirms my position. And then I grab that and I jump in. And so somebody says we don't respond, we reload. And so much of our interactions are like that, and they're born out of bad habits. So you would, in order to get what we're talking about here, dialogue, we would have to sort of, explore our intention. What's my intention in talking with you?
I'd like to just say one thing, expand it a little more, because not only are these bad habits of interaction, they're bad habits of life.
Yeah.
Because we're not really even paying attention to our life. If we're not storing about it and trying to get our position on our own life with nobody else there, I mean, and so then it's a very broad thing to say. It's not only a skill of interaction.
Well, I mean, if you take the word and just stretch it a little bit, dialogue outside of human conversation, you realize that it's the way you interface with life. Same things apply. What's my intention in doing whatever, in cooking this food, or in cultivating this garden, or doing this work, or having this relationship, or whatever it is that I'm doing? What kind of attitudes do I bring to it? I mean, do I already know what I want as an outcome? Am I open? Am I flexible? Do I see the value of the other perspective, and then the skills that I bring to it? So in some ways, dialogue is not only a conversation between people, but as you rightly say, it suggests a way of life. I would suggest that it is exactly that.
Yeah, I would like to say something about intention, like, that
Right.
Maybe we could just divide it into one big swoop, because so much of intention is just like to get rid of this thing and to get out of here. I'm going to eat my food and get on to something that's important, I'm going to talk to this guy, I'm going to buy this stuff at this store, and then get out of here, And so then I'm totally absent. And that's a huge intention. Now, how many times actually do we have an intention to really be here and really focus on something and really solve something, or we just get swept away with always the intention of moving on. Later something's going to be right, Later I'm going to get somewhere, and maybe we never really have a qualitative intention that has a desire to really create something out of this moment.
As you bring that up, it strikes me as you can approach something that's really critical to all of us, and you find it reflected in all of the great traditions, the ability to be present in the moment. So we can either think about that and sort of say, well, I'm going to work on my intention, or we can practice. And when we talk about dialogue, we're talking about skills. We could practice those skills, and one of the byproducts hopefully would be the capacity to be more present qualitatively to whatever it is that we're doing.
That's a belief structure too, because we could say, of course I can be present. I'm right here. Where else am I? But nothing's going on here. There's nothing here, I mean, I'm with boring people. I'm in a boring family. I'm in a boring city. The weather's terrible in Chicago. I got to be in the tropics or something, or whatever, You might just not realize that there's any value. And if you're trying to find the value in interpretation, the present is always quite neutral, quite easygoing, and quite, could be said, mundane. And if you're only looking for special effects, probably your mind is the best place to find them. You never find them on the face of this globe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're kind of getting at something which is really critical. A friend of mine once said, if you're bored, you're not paying attention, because there's so much going on. And one of the things that can help us to pay attention is story. It sounds kind of obvious, but maybe it's not, because story we think of maybe, or we associate with something over here, something we do with children, or when we go to a movie or a play or something very specific. But actually, when you and I meet, if I tell you a little bit about what's really going on in me, that's my story. And I can guarantee that as I do it, if I were to tell you a little bit about something that's important to me, you would find yourself attracted. You couldn't help but do it. And you would want to probably reciprocate. Even that little piece, developing the capacity to share a story, to be maybe a little skillfully vulnerable, could go a long way in addressing this piece, this tendency to fragment and not be there, and all the rest of it. So.
That's amazing, because a lot of times you notice that your sad story, a lot of people are sad sacks, right? And they're always telling a story, but it's really kind of putting them into a blind alley. And it's amazing that a story has kind of like that double-edgedness, like it can actually put you into, your interpretation that I'm victimized and I'm abused and that government's bad news and that my street floods and everything's wrong, That's a story, right? And so then in the same breath, the story can actually take you out of there, take you out of that, out of the blues.
Well, I think there's kind of two levels of what you're saying. One is the fundamental story of who I am, which is neither sad nor happy. It's just what it is. I mean, people will interpret it accordingly. But then the second level is the story that I tell myself about life or about you or about me. We kind of create these stories and then they become really assumptions. It's like they constitute the lens through which we look at the world. My wife is a therapist, and people will come in and they'll say, this is what's going on. And she'll say, well, you know what? That's the story you're telling yourself. You could probably change that story.
Right. But we say we create that story, but let's just say we inherit it too.
Well, I believe that, yes, we have a lens through which we look at the world. And it comes partly in our DNA, partly in our culture, partly reinforced by the experiences that we have. For example, I was born in Belfast. People probably know a little bit about Belfast. But it was a world where you inherited prejudices, biases towards one community, depending which one you were on. I grew up Catholic, so Protestants were seen as the enemy, to put it in sort of blunt terms. So you kind of inherit that, and if you don't have an experience that kind of suggests otherwise, you'll probably continue to live out of that place. There's a little piece of a poem by an American poet, William Stafford, and he says, if you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world. And following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. Well, I grew up in a world where patterns that others made and I inherited caused people to actually kill each other. Talk about missing an opportunity to know each other. It was so destructive for so long. So yes, the story is inherited and reinforced, and it really does take something important, something powerful to break open that lens. So.
I remember as a child also there were stereotypes and even gangs and, but races and religions and so on. And I remember actually noticing and really knowing and really understanding, I like that guy, but when they all get together, I don't like him anymore.
Yeah.
But I could never do anything with that. I could really never make that to the next step and really take it anywhere, but I really understood that.
Sure. Well, the collective structures that we live in probably dictate so much for us. We as Americans are fed whatever the party line in our newspapers and on our TVs, and we buy it. Well, somebody says we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So we're constantly, if you like, reaffirming the beliefs that we've inherited. And in a culture like ours, that those biases are constantly being fed. Here's what the value is. Look at your TV any day, You're being told who you are. You're being told a story.
Is that pretty universal, that the world is a reflection of our own beliefs and thoughts and expectations?
Well, I think in one sense we construct reality. Somebody says there's raw data out there. If it were ever available, if there's any such thing as objective reality, that's a question, a philosophical question.
Yeah, how can you get to it? How can you touch it? That's
Well,
great. There's raw data out there. Something's here. Okay.
Well, sometimes in the work that I've done, there's a tool in the organizational field called the ladder of inference. And what it does, it reflects the internal process that we're describing, thinking about right now. Imagine the ground as raw data. Well, the ladder has a number of rungs. Well, the first rung on the ladder is I select data. For example, I'm standing here. I see the data differently from you because you're standing over there. If you can develop that and show, well, because I'm male and you're female, or because I'm older and you're younger, because I'm black and you're white, and because I come from this country or whatever, I select data accordingly. Second rung on the ladder is I add meaning. Third rung is I start to make inferences about you. Fourth rung on the ladder, I draw conclusions about what's going on. Fifth rung, I reinforce my beliefs. And the sixth rung is fascinating. I defend noble certainties. And we fight wars over noble certainties. And we have family feuds over noble. Isn't that an interesting term? Noble certainties?
Right. But even before the first rung, I have a certain interest, and I have a certain thing, and there's a lot of things that don't interest me whatsoever. And you said we select data, but I mean, those things that I'm not interested in sometimes don't even hit the radar. I don't even notice them.
That's where we started off. I mean, we do have a lens. These are our mostly unconscious beliefs. That causes me to select data accordingly.
Yeah. Okay, consciously or unconsciously?
Mostly unconsciously.
Right on.
Mostly unconsciously. That's what I mean about. So we're actually making our world as we go. It's almost like we're
right on. So then the raw data, whatever the percentage of importance of the raw data, it's probably pretty small, right?
Hey, raw data, whatever that means, as I said. But here's another little thought. D.H. Lawrence, that wonderful Welsh poet, he said something like this. He says, when we get out of the glass bottle of our ego, so think of that lens, and when we escape like squirrels turning in the cages of our personalities, just think of the biases and prejudices that we have, and get into the forest again. So back to basics. We shall shiver with cold and fright, and things will happen to us so that we do not know ourselves. Have you ever experienced that? Something breaks in, life breaks in, you get a diagnosis, you lose someone close to you, kind of a cosmic nudge, and you find yourself saying, damn it, if I get through this, or now I know what's important. And then he says, so we know that experience. So D.H. Lawrence, then he continues, he says, cool, unlying life will rush in. We'll see what's really important. You find yourself saying, is that the way I've always thought? There's a whole other world out there. And passion will make our bodies taut with power. We shall stamp our feet with new power, and old things will fall down. We shall laugh, and institutions will curl up like burnt paper. How do you change things? There's how you change things. Sometimes life does it for you, it breaks you open, as I said, a kind of a cosmic nudge. Sometimes you can create the conditions a little bit, which is really what we're getting at. Is it possible for us to change? Is it possible for us to create the conditions where we might see things a little differently? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, that's the questions I was kind of asking when we just started, or maybe just before I said hi. And saying, well, I mean, we're into dialogue. Does it work? We have high expectations and high intentions that, yes, we can change. Not necessarily we can change others. We could just see the light ourselves, and maybe model it. And if it works, somebody can see, hey, look at him, he changed.
Well, I've been in the business of change, all my adult life. For many years, I actually was a Catholic priest in Africa. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So there was I over there trying to change people. Now, the good news is I was probably shaped by the 60s, which questioned all of those assumptions. So by the time I got there, it really was, for a short Camelot period, an opportunity for us to explore a different way of interacting that would be mutually enhancing, where we would learn from each other, that it wouldn't be one size fits all. It wouldn't be us from the West having the answers. Even the way we kind of think today with our democracy projects, like the American way of life, that's our new mission. And you
Right.
know how we push that, huh?
Of course.
Oh,
But I mean, when you said that, just to go back, when you said you learn from each other, do you mean you as the Catholic Church or the institution were learning from your parishioners
well,
or converts?
I can only speak for myself. That was the point. I learned more from African people living in the semi-desert scrubland of Kenya than I learned from many of the universities that I was in. Now, did the institution learn? Well, at that time, I was part of the institution and trying to foster some new thinking in it. But the institution for a while was open. In the wake of the 60s, there was a kind of a time whenever things looked like they might change. You saw it in Central America with what they called liberation theology, with a much greater emphasis on, say, human rights and justice in the Catholic world. And then I think it happened all over the world, not just in the Catholic Church, but also in politics in this country and in the UK and in Europe. The lid came down.
Yeah,
Like,
but the Spanish bishops were always really forth thinkers and very active and very honored now, I
I mean,
think.
the South American bishops, you're
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, some of them were certainly because circumstances demanded that, their people were poor. Hey, if this religion doesn't address these harsh realities, it's not worth anything, right?
Right. You'd think it would have to somehow, there'd have to be a traction point where it would actually show up somewhere, you know.
Ideally, that's what it is about, yeah. I mean, but like so many institutions, they fall into the trap of maintaining themselves and they lose the very charism and the very vision that impelled them in the first place. Nothing new in that.
Maybe that's the practice. I do think that the Catholic Church, you know more about it than I do, probably has some very foresighted ideas about rights and really who the individual is. And
Well, hey, it's been in the business for 2,000 years, so it has gathered some wisdom. There is powerful tradition there. But you know what? It's also an institution like all human institutions and has been subject to distortion and corruption down through the years. And still today, there are powerful people in it. And I can speak for them. As a former priest, I can speak to the men and women that I knew as wonderful people, but I also know what institutions can do to you. And if you get it into your head that this is your profession and you're really trying to, your ambition sort of to get promoted or to have standing and so on begins to dominate, of course you can lose that charisma and that vision. But there is a lot there in that tradition, as there are in all of the world's traditions.
I've just been volunteering a little bit at a Catholic university, so I'm learning more and more
Really?
about really it's a Dominican order, so they kind of have a lot of good thought on sharing and on education.
Original,
Say again?
it was called, Dominicans were called the Order of Preachers originally, so they were the teachers that were created in the 13th century, this guy Dominic. But in fact, there's many, if you like, initiatives in the Catholic Church over the years to address the human issues as they were experienced, whether it was poverty or environment or education or women's rights and so forth. So, I mean, there's a powerful tradition there. But, one thought that I would add is like there's good religion and bad religion. I was saying recently to a friend, there are basic impulse and needs in human beings, individuals, and organizations. For example, there's a need for learning. So education supposedly serves that, but there's good education and bad education. But just because this particular institute of education is bad doesn't mean to suggest to you that, okay, I'm going to do it on my own. Forget that. We don't need education. We just can learn on our own. In a similar way, health is a fundamental need. Well, there's bad health care and good health care. Well, in a similar way, religion, which really has to do with purpose and meaning, the larger kind of context in which we all find ourselves, should be addressing that. But there's good religion and bad religion. So because you have a bad experience, and a lot of people have had bad experiences with church and synagogue and so forth, and they reject it, they throw it out. And it's very understandable. But I would suggest that, we still need that particular dimension to become full human beings. Where do you go for it? Sometimes you don't find it in the church. I don't know. I probably spend my time these days looking for ways of making sure, integrating this component into the work that I do.
So many things when you say good religion, good education, and bad education. Well,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, all these things, and the good is really to promote openness. And when we're open, we can see what works for health and what gets better, what's going to work and when it stops working, you know, what's good religion and, you know, is openness again.
You know, in all of these dimensions of life, whether it's religion or education or health, there are three things that come into play, and we've been talking about them indirectly and directly. Intention is one, like what is the intention of each one of those things? So getting more clarity and about that is really, really important. You know, for education, what is the purpose of education? Well, it's to help people to understand. It's not to sort of make sure they think this way or that way. Or what's the purpose of healthcare? Well, it's not to make money. It's to help people become healthier human beings. The second aspect is attitudes. And, you know, you need to foster the right attitudes in order to be healthy, right? In the same way,
Explain a little bit about the difference between intention and attitudes.
Well, I think, for example, I can have the intention to have a good relationship with you, all right? But my attitudes, shall we put it in common parlance, suck. In other words, I have a bad attitude. There are three basic attitudes which I think cover all of the essential attitudes in human relations: openness, empathy, and equality. If I'm open to you, then my intention will be realized a little bit. Our intention will be realized. If I'm not open, even if I want to have a good relationship with you, what chance do I have? If I don't empathize with your perspective, if I can't put myself in your shoes, what chance do I have of really understanding you and developing a relationship? Or if I think that your perspective is not equal to mine, if I think that what I have to say is superior to yours, or vice versa, what chance is there for that intention to be realized? So you can see that attitudes need to be cultivated, and they come under those general categories of openness, empathy, and equality, and they help the intention to be realized. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I don't know exactly, you know, I mean, that's the first time I heard you say that, so I'm not, you know, I'm just absorbing it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Openness, certainly openness is important, you know, that's the one I see as important. And then maybe not so many expectations, which means like I don't expect I'm going to tell you something, and I don't necessarily expect that I'm a teacher, and I don't expect you're going to tell me something that I'm a student.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, that's an equality you were saying.
There's the equality piece.
Yeah, I haven't heard it said that way.
Isn't it? I mean, it's not my own. I mean, I can.
And empathy, you know, empathy is just a capacity to, I don't know, it's not to objectify everything around me. You know, if I objectify you and say you're a thing, you know, you're just a Belfaster, and I'm,
exactly.
You know, and you've always been, you know, a feisty guy, and those Irish guys always fight, you know. I mean, exactly. What do I know? That would be just like objectifying, and I wouldn't empathize with that. I'd say, no, I never fight. I'm a negotiator. Yes, make myself different, right?
So if my attitudes lack openness, empathy, and equality, what chance is there for the dialogue we've been talking about to happen? Very little, right?
Right. But maybe, you know, I have a whole series of beliefs and objectives that, you know, beliefs in scarcity and objectives to have my way and get my land back, and, you know, and
sure.
And whatever, and certain institutions are holding those away from me. And so then I don't want to be equal with them, or I don't want to accept their ideas. I just want my land back. You know, I've got this fixed belief that my granddad was ripped off, and that belongs to my family over there. Or, you know, things like that about wealth and about scarcity and about, you know, the goods. Somebody else got the goods, and they live high and we live low. And
which is why dialogue, in the true sense that we've been talking about it, doesn't apply to every situation. Sometimes there is need for debate. That's why we have courts. The court isn't so much a dialogue as a statement of, this is the law. Are you fulfilling the law? Are there rights being kind of ignored here? And so on. and discussion would be really a focus on, well, what is the kind of reasoning behind this, and what are the various elements of the case? A little bit like debate, but quieter analysis and so forth. Dialogue is really whenever there is the intention to discover together a creative outcome.
I love discover, that's like, I've been thinking of that for years and years, saying, and that was a really good, I mean, if I would name the show something else, it might have discovery in there.
That's probably well put, because, anytime there's a creative conversation going on, there is a discovery, right? You find yourself saying things, I never quite thought of it like that before. Or that's I didn't know you thought like that.
Discovery, I have all those elements in it already. It's got openness, definitely. It's also got not knowing. Somehow the only way I can discover is if I don't claim to know. And somehow if I'm discovering together with others, I have to take their opinion seriously, so that there is an equality there. So discovery is a huge word.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can see, I have found that this dialogue thing, one, it was part of my earliest experience, the absence of it maybe, in Belfast. Two, it was a genuine intention on the part of people like myself in the 70s in Africa, born out of the 60s and the questioning of values, to take a different approach to traditional missionary approach, which had the answers kind of thing. And then in more recent times, a lot of my work with organizations, and in the field of sustainability, which is the focus that I'm on these days, clearly dialogue is critical, because certainly in terms of sustainability, it's so complex and no easy answers, and certainly no one has any monopoly on the truth.
So that is a huge discovery. What is this sustainability? Because it started out just being like use less energy and recycle your waste.
Yeah.
And that was like the easy, things to cover. And then when you try to put the human in the equation, and then the community, and then the environment in the equation, and all those things have been hidden ways to shoot stuff up our smokestack, throw it in the river, get cheap labor, and threaten communities by closing the factory and say, you better give us some free taxes or we'll just close this place up and get the heck out of here and move to Mexico.
Well, exactly. There's a lot of assumptions behind those positions, or that approach to the environment, or even to sustainability. And here in New York, where I'm living, in the town of Bedford, about 4 years ago, a group of us convened the community in the local library around climate change. That was the term that was being used then. Well, it was a record turnout because people were interested. But just to fast forward, over a short period of 4 years, all kinds of things have happened, like a climate action plan, like a summit that brought together over 1,000 people twice in the past 4 years, like an implementation group of task forces, which has its own non-profit status. It's doing all this stuff. So the practical aspects of sustainability are being addressed. At the same time, what's happening now is people trying to explore, well, you know what, we can make all these little changes, but in the larger scheme of things, when you think of China, you think of like even the lack of agreement here in our own country around sustainability issues, boy, it can be a little anxiety provoking. So where they found themselves going in recent times is to have a look at, what do we really mean by sustainability? And what began to surface was, sustainability is about learning how to survive and thrive together. That's the way human beings have always done it, by learning how to survive and thrive together. What that meant was adapting. And that comes out of a process of genuine dialogue and discovering, what does it mean to be a human being today? Discovering, how should human beings live in the world? Because there's lots of others that we share it with.
Right. Well, that when together is a big word, because you say thrive and grow and thrive together.
Yeah.
And together with who? If we live in a kind of society that's rather uniform, we're probably already doing that. We're thriving and growing together, even in our SUVs, right? But if we take a wider view, sustainability, and to me, I'm always saying that whatever we touch is humanity, whether it's the environment, whether it's energy, whether it's resources. Somehow when we leave it, it's in better shape than when we got there. And, that to me is sustainability, because it takes into account future generations. And the way it is now, we degrade so much. We even degrade our relationships with other countries and stuff, and take advantage of them. And so then that we're building up a hornet's nest there for our grandchildren. And so then that seems to be the simple way for me to say before we get into too much into sustainability, which is one of my favorite topics, I don't want to leave, because I think you said intention, attitude, and the third thing, a third thing we didn't get there to yet. Let's get on the third one,
You'll be back. Well, the third thing, I think, in all cases, again, is skills. And that's the part that often gets overlooked, a certain kind of skills. And for me, the skills of dialogue are essentially three: connecting, listening, and discovering. If you think about it, in a good conversation, often people, well, put it this way, in many conversations, people are not even present to each other. We talked about that already. You have a meeting and people are hardly in the room. They may be there physically, they're certainly not present, and they're not connected to each other. Insofar as you can foster, and there are skills that can help you to be connected to each other, to be present to each other, whenever that happens, some kind of dialogue is likely to happen. If I know you, if I understand you a little bit better, if I know your story, chances of something happening are greater. The second little skill, well, it's more than a little skill, is listening, because it covers so much. We talked about it earlier, some of the bad habits we have, but being able to listen to each other. I would say to people often, when I was teaching this stuff, if you could raise the level of your listening 5%, you would change your world, because so much more would get in. So listening is the second area of skill. It's listening not only to another person, but it's being able to listen to yourself in a way where you kind of preclude simple reaction, spontaneous kind of bias. There's also a kind of a listening to what's trying to be said, which kind of throws me into the third aspect of skills, which is discovery. Sometimes some people are really good at kind of listening for what's trying to happen. You're in a conversation or in a meeting, and some people are good at saying, what we seem to be saying, or what seems to be emerging here is, and they can give voice to it, and then others can build on it. It's a kind of a skill that allows us to discover and build together. So for me, connecting, listening, and discovering are the three basic skills of dialogue.
What comes to me is first, we have to look at respecting, because you certainly can't listen to someone or connect with them or even discover with them. You can discover without them maybe, but I mean, if you don't respect, and really what is respect? Is that just a religious tenet, or do we have to just come off, and how do we respect people? Is that something you can learn, or is that a skill?
Well, I mentioned that those three aspects of intention, attitudes, and skills, I think they actually can work together to enhance each other. So, for example, respect probably comes in under something to do with equality. That one of the three attitudes I mentioned: openness, empathy, and equality. If I respect you, I see you as an equal. I probably have a sense of empathy. I'm open to you. So respect probably fits in there. I can have the good intention of respecting you, but if I don't, for example, connect with you, if I don't hear your story, the chances of my having empathy for you, of learning to respect you, won't happen. If I don't know how to listen to you, or put it more positively, if I really learn how to listen to you, I probably will respect you more, because I'll understand where you're coming from.
Okay, let's say I got a certain amount of short-term memory, and I can kind of come back with three of these things at a time, and I'm not doing too bad at that, But if I'm really going to distill this whole thing, let's say I really write it down, or you send me a scheme, and I really study it and all that stuff, and I try to, and I like it, I think this is a good idea. And actually, I'm in a situation where I need it. I mean, like I've got some rocky relationships here and
Okay.
there, and
Hmm.
I even need it, But what I'm saying is like I've got some kind of a core inheritance that we said, that how I
Yes.
behave and how I hold myself and how I hold the world. And really, all these good ideas are not really destructuring or modifying my basic idea that, I am kind of screwed and that we
Mm.
are disadvantaged and we've got droughts and, there's really famine here and there's a lot of infractions of rights and we were mistreated for centuries, actually. And even Ireland. I mean, you guys were invaded left and right for thousands of years, right? And so you guys have that attitude,
Right.
that like, what could be worse than being Irish? Nothing, so I might as well enjoy it, right?
Well, there's an interesting interpretation of data.
Yeah, but I mean, if you listen to Irish music and stuff like that, it's pretty. There's a lot of sadness in it, and a lot of deep sentiment. And
Well, one of the great writers said, the great God in his heaven, he made the great Gael mad. The Gael is the Irish. For all their wars are happy, and all their songs are sad.
well, I don't know. I mean, I was always scared to go to Ireland. I lived in Europe for 12 years or something, but I never went to Ireland because I don't know. I was just always thinking, well, what are they doing up there in Belfast and stuff? And why are they having these terrorist groups and stuff? And I don't know. I'll just leave them alone to themselves, I just didn't participate. So, I
Well,
mean,
let me go
that
back
was
to
my
you,
attitude.
because there was a clear example of a situation where all the good intention in the world wouldn't necessarily move anything and didn't for years. There are two things I think that maybe we could look at in terms of assisting or helping the process of change where something might happen. The first one is life has a way of breaking in anyway. I think that's what you find. It certainly happened in Belfast time and time again. You might be moving along and with your biases and all the rest of it, and you see these people that they're the enemy, they're in that camp and so on. But then suddenly something happens that just breaks you open. I'll give you an example. My brother's sister-in-law won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1977. Two women in Ireland. What happened was my my brother's wife's another sister was coming home with her children one day, and was a gunman. I can remember his name too, Danny, like my own, was being pursued by the British Army, and it was in a crowded, populated residential area on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. And they opened fire on this guy and they shot him dead in the car. And the car mounted the footpath and hit this woman with her 3 kids. And she woke up 6 weeks later out of a coma with 1 child. Sometimes life breaks in. What happened was it galvanized the women of Northern Ireland. And they started to come across the lines of Protestant and Catholic to meet and insist on peace against the extremists on both sides. Over that period, over that year of 1976, something like about, I don't know, they say something like 400,000 women came onto the streets. Now you're talking about a population, the whole population of Northern Ireland is only 1.5 million. Women came onto the streets for that whole year, and it stopped. It caused something to happen that opened up, I would say, put in the foundations for what finally, over a long period of time, became peace. So sometimes life will break in and you just can't ignore it. So the same thing can happen to us, when we're in a relationship and, I can't get beyond my prejudice or my anger against you or whatever. But then something happens and I see a side of you that I never saw before, and boom, there's an opportunity. So that's clearly one time when life does it for you. And
yeah, well, life will always do it for you, because in the end you'll be dead, But I mean, we don't want to wait that much. That's what our dialogues are all about. We're trying to say, relieve suffering. And something about having a lot of good ideas is great, but something about really taking an honest look at your story and seeing if you can destruct the parts that are non-life affirmative. you know, would be, or take a deep look at them, and actually an honest look at them, and say, are these things like leftover inheritances? Do I need them? And really look at it. I mean,
But what motivates you to do that? Sometimes it takes what I was calling a cosmic nudge for, when life breaks. And sometimes it takes that. Otherwise, we never do.
no, that's right. It takes that, but I'm saying, is there a way to speed that process, or actually not wait that long? Or, I mean, there's so much growth out of suffering. But I mean, it's almost like the planet is not that flexible anymore, It used to be more elastic, and it would say, okay, those little guys could suffer, but now they got rocket launchers on their shoulder,
Sure.
And they take out a few hotels or something like that.
Well, your question is valid, and I would sort of address it in two ways. One is, life is always breaking in, and I think as we sort of hone our intention about what it is that we're doing, so it's one aspect of dialogue, maybe you become a little bit more aware. Maybe as we try, and this is where the second aspect of it comes in, even attempting to apply some of these simple skills. As I said earlier on, if we increased our capacity, our level of listening, even 5%, things begin to happen. You begin to see things differently. So there's two aspects of it. One is life is always breaking in, and so using those opportunities, not simply to react and say, okay, well, let's explore why that happened and see how we could preclude that or whatever. The second thing is, have a shot at taking even one tiny little aspect of any of the things that we were talking about with dialogue, like listening differently, or connecting before you get down to business, whether it's in a meeting or in a conversation, and just watch what happens. See how it opens up your life. I think both of those things are valid aspects of, and they're very concrete. They're not just ideas. This is the way that I think human beings have always changed their world. Remember that statement of Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. Or think about all the great inventions. They often were born out of just sitting around a table. I wonder if we thought, what if we did it that way, and so on. It's always been that way.
That's what I say is about dialogue, because like we're just saying that right now. I wonder if we did this, if we thought that, and that's basically what I'm saying. Of course, Margaret Mead, I guess a tsunami can change things in life, and that's not necessarily a small group of committed people.
Mm-hmm.
But like you're saying, life can break in a radical way.
Yeah. And it is happening all the time. It's just that we have such a capacity to cover it over and quickly fix it, and get on with it. Look at the number of times. Look at the crises that we've experienced even in the past couple of years in our world. You just look around you, whether it's the Arab world, or whether it's the tsunami, or whether it's the fierce fires in Russia last year, or whether it was the flooding in Australia, whether it was the changes in food production in India, and so on. All of these things, they're there on our radar for what? How long does our attention span last? And then we quickly can package them and move on.
What about that? And that would be something to discover about. What is this covering over process, and why does it seem to be so important?
Well, on the one hand, somebody said, it was a French mathematician called Pascal. He said, the infinite spaces terrify me. It's almost like to open up, take the lid off, and explore the things that these crises have to cause us to question, like, what the hell is going on? What is this life about? Where do I fit, and so forth? That can be a frightening experience, and we, I think, probably need to create the conditions even to do such exploration. So we far rather cover it over.
So when I look into that, and that's kind of like our process here, whether it's mine or whether it's what I try to lead, or whether it's the people that I come on here. If I'm to look into mathematics, I would be willing to say, because we make a basic distinction that there's raw material, the way we explained it in a very nice way to say it. Something's here. And then we, as a human, we're able to interpret that because we have this abstract abstraction capability, which
Mm.
other beings don't seem to have, or not to our degree of it. And
Yeah.
so it's called describe it, and we can make up a lot of things. I honestly don't believe there's any such thing as infinity, and there's no, it's not, it doesn't come in the, it's not in the raw materials, you know, it's an idea, you know, it's an
Mm.
extension. And there's no zero either, because nothing is really nothing, you know, there is no nothing in space. It's 4 degrees Kelvin in space.
Mm.
And so there's, you know, if, as long as you can see a star, there's a ray there somewhere,
Yeah.
and you can see a lot of stars in space. And so then there's a lot of abstractions, and really that's what is full for us. We are full by our abstractions, and or let's say this, you know, sometimes we can bump into the raw material in a way.
Mm.
And there's a point, you know, like even in science, they put a point on the curve and say, yes, the experiment showed this. And then there's another point, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow we try to put a curve through those points and say that's the way it is, you know, and we're filling the blank. But really what's here mostly is nothing, you know, and there's an emptiness that seems to be uncomfortable to the mind. The mind wants to have an answer in this. And
But even these terms like nothing and emptiness are constructs too, in order to try to hold this so-called raw material, or certainly this raw experience. But that doesn't stop us from trying. One philosopher I remember being familiar with called us the symbolic animals. How people, even in the worst of conditions, like in prison camps, if they could make sense of it, if they felt that there was someone on the other end waiting for them, if they felt that they were suffering for a purpose, they could actually survive. They could survive even longer than you know than people could survive in the absence of food. So, you know, it's a long roundabout way of saying we cannot but try to make sense of things. It's just as basic an impulse as anything else that we have.
well, that's okay, you know. I mean, that's totally okay, and it seems real normal, and it seems like an activity that most of us are engaged in.
Mm.
But maybe we shouldn't really try to confuse that with the raw material and say that you know, my sense of things is really real. You know,
Mm.
I don't think anyone, if they really looked at it, you know, I certainly don't believe that I can make a few sounds, which another human being would say are words, and somehow embrace the cosmos.
Mm. Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
that's a pretty arrogant idea, and
Well,
really, we were talking about beauty the other day, and we were saying, well, what is beauty? And we just kind of realized, at least this is what came to us. We said that not knowing is beauty, because I don't know what a flower is. I don't know what a sunset is.
mm-hmm.
But I might know that a painting was, you know, historically the first time they ever drew perspective, and all of a sudden I know it. It's not that beautiful anymore. You know, the mystery,
Mm-hmm.
you know, living in the mystery is somehow very beautiful and very enticing and very alive, and there's an edge to it, you know, that really is wonderful. And all our knowledges are kind of really boring.
I think that's intriguing even to say it that way. As I was saying, it doesn't stop us from trying to make sense. By the way, the guy was Viktor Frankl, the person I was trying to think of. But someone else comes to mind whenever you say this about beauty. Wendell Berry is a Kentucky farmer. He writes beautiful poetry, but he talks about, you know, the peace of wild things, or coming into the grace of things. And when I think of beauty, I certainly don't think of the knowledge piece or the symmetry or the craft so much as the grace, which has a sense of mystery to it. I mean, the beauty of a child, for example, is so spontaneous. A child dancing or a flower blooming, it's not contrived, and there's no real explanation of it. You can come up with kind of descriptions of the process, which is what science does, I suppose, but there's a quality to it. You're right. And maybe in the end, the capacity to be present to mystery without knowing, and being able to be in the presence of the grace of things. Maybe in the end, there is the ultimate stance. As I said, at the same time, that doesn't stop us.
No, it doesn't stop us. But that's like what I think what people are talking about is actually the ultimate fulfillment is what they call vulnerability. And vulnerability doesn't necessarily, so many people think, oh, vulnerability, that means I'm gonna hurt and there's gonna be pain there. No, that doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you're not really knowing if it's gonna hurt or not, And then vulnerability is like actually the foundation of love. And okay, you get hurt. But if you can blot out all your hurts, you are automatically blotting out all of connection, all of love, all of respect, all of the thrill of life. You're just blotting it all out, just by your knowledge, I guess, and your.
Well, and again, I think you're implying that we sometimes, maybe more than we realize, use our knowledge to protect ourselves against this mystery that. As we get older, I don't know about you, but I find myself knowing less and less and less and less. And I'm not just talking about the sort of disintegration of my dear mind and my knowledge, my sort of brain cells. I'm talking about genuinely realizing that what I call knowledge is so infinitesimal. And maybe it allows me to relax in the grace of the world, as Wendell Berry would call it. I think the same thing applies even in a relationship. With my wife, what brought us together in the early stages probably had many dimensions to it, including like attraction and so forth. But as you get older, the beauty that you're talking about, you begin to realize that it really is much more to do with a mystery, and by a mystery, you mean I don't know. And letting that in, as you said, that word vulnerable, I think is a beautiful word. It's not just I'm vulnerable in the sense that there's wounds there, but that I'm actually open to being hurt. And often the thing that hurts us most is that inability to know and control.
It seems that way, that seems it, but it really, knowing and controlling really doesn't protect us from hurts at all. And in fact, it puts us in some really binds that we get blindsided like crazy because we think we're in control, and whammo, I think it's dangerous. And I'd like to say that okay, we can kid around and say we're getting older and we don't remember too much and stuff like that, but really, there should be a way to share this in a wider in a wider in a wider space, where more people could really try it out. There should be a way to not just profess it and say, accept me, I'm wise and I'm old and I've been around, but somehow just to put it out like this is a science project, and you can try it out in your own life and somehow put it out like that. Okay, you can have skills, you can have respect, you can have all those kind of things we said, but you can also just, with your presence and with your awareness, just notice that when you really feel fulfilled and you feel connected and you so much connection that you don't even know how it could possibly happen. And some people are willing to call it oneness or something. This is when you really don't know anything. And I mean, it's even logical because science, religion, education, everything is changing their descriptions decade by decade by decade, and faster and faster and faster. So what I mean is like what was true yesterday isn't true today. But not, what we're willing to believe that now we understand. Now we got it, Before, it wasn't so good, and then 100 years ago it was really terrible. They were moving fast. But, what could ever convince us that, like, this is not going to change immediately tomorrow and really fast, too? Way faster than so far in our lifetime. Yeah. Things are going to just change. Because description is not life. The menu is not the meal.
No. But, I made a pilgrimage last year. It wasn't a religious pilgrimage directly, but it was a sacred journey nonetheless. I went back to all the places that had shaped my soul. I was in Belfast, I was in the south of Ireland, I was in Africa, I was in Rome where I'd spent some years and so forth. And one of the things that you notice is that river really was flowing all the time, Because you go back and you haven't seen a place for 30 years, or you haven't seen people for
Oh
long.
my God, yeah.
And yet, there's something. This is the interesting thing. There is still an identity there, whether it's a place
You can go.
or whether it's a person. Somehow or another, even through their wrinkled grayness, you can still see that same person who was a boy when you saw them last. What's that about? Is there some kind of identity that transcends even the changes in us? Now there's a thought, right?
Right. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, like the changes, there is something that's the same. It's just our brightness. Our brightness is still there, right? And that's the same. Now the look of it is different, and then I don't know. It's almost scary for me to go back somewhere from 30 years ago because I don't know. I mean, that's just like, oh my God, it just feels up too much of
Well,
my.
I found it very reaffirming because it was like I found again, I saw again that identity, that child, that same spirit, I suppose, that was there at the beginning. I saw also how it made certain choices, this individual, myself, and sometimes compromised this identity, this basic unique spirit that was, well, unique to me, just as you have your own particular unique spirit. But we all make choices throughout life, and just seeing that and seeing the effect of those things and trying to determine, well, was there something there, a core, and say, oh yeah, there was, and maybe that would be worth kind of cultivating even at this stage of my life. What else do I have? Somebody says that, I mean, the ultimate imperative for every human being is to discover who you are uniquely and become that. Well, there's a life's journey for you.
Even from the beginning, when we started to say that the raw materials, that was a nice way to say like something's here. And then we talked about interpretation, and then we talked about our inheritance, which was like actually our psychological inheritance or our somehow belief structure inheritance.
Sure.
And it was kind of it led us to all our behaviors probably because with those descriptions and those, and then sometimes I kind of playfully, I kind of just referred to that as a story we tell ourselves, and I think we looked into that too, and in a way, I mean, this our whole culture is a story, of course, and our history. I mean, we don't even know the story of our history because we just most of the professionals that tell history do it for a certain reason, to buoy our spirits up or something like that, and so then they have a certain colored. We don't even know our history of ourselves. I mean, and when we remember, our remembrances basically are all enhanced, either to be good or bad. Maybe we want to be real abused persons, and we'll enhance the abuse parts of it. But who knows what is history? But I mean, in a way, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we live a virtual life, a life of ideas, and we live out of that virtual life. Whereas animals probably don't do that. They just live out of instinct, and they migrate because they migrate, not because they think it's a good idea or have a good free airline miles or anything like that. Or they, they all live just as their dharma. And I guess people talk like that. We live on our various cultural. I'm going to call it virtual, not meaning the internet, but more or less meaning just our thoughts. We live on thoughts, and then, it's somewhat related to the raw materials of life. Maybe, let's say. I mean, who's to say? We have no way of touching the raw materials of life directly without an idea, or at least the idea pops up simultaneously, so it's hard to split it up. So then, basically, what I'm saying is life is conceptual based, and. We can accept that. We can accept that. That's not a real mean thing to say, and it's a game we play. We're on the Monopoly board.
But what if I were to suggest that it's an aspect of it? What if we could sort of imagine that yes, we do all of that, and we construct reality in a sense. You used the term virtual, and it's valid to sort of I think I said like that. But what if we were to say that actually life lives us? just the way it lives the flowers. Now, whatever you mean by life, you can call it what you can call it the universe, you can call it energy, you can call it God for all I care.
Right.
But in a sense, it's the underpinning reality that gives being to whatever, whether it's a mountain or a flower or a human being. So, in a very real sense, and I don't think it's a stretch to say, life lives us. We participate. Dear old Rilke, the German poet, he said, to work with things in the indescribable relationship is not too hard for us. That's what we're doing. We're actually just working with. It's like working with the river. The river carries you, whether you like it or you don't. My father used to say, you know what, when I would say, well, you're so much older than me, he said, I'm just a little further down the river. And he was dead right, because we're all in the same river. Well, that we easily say, but we still sort of kind of objectify it as if we individuals were in the river. But what if the river is what lives us, and we're expressions of it?
So we are the river. We are, we are the river. No, I totally agree that life lives us, because our virtual world doesn't have the power to pump 1 ounce of blood or inhale 1 thing of oxygen, or doesn't know what eating is, or, how life works, or doesn't know anything, It's just where we put our attention, like our bank accounts, our job, our kids, our education, our community, if we got the right wife or whatever, all those things is where we put our attention. And then life lives us is like, unfortunately, we don't give that an ounce of intention, and that's what we're calling presence and all those things, and life without concepts, we're just saying. But I mean, I don't want to say we should deny all those concepts, because I mean, it seems like we can't help it, right? But I mean, that
brings us kind of like, in a sense, full circle to a notion of dialogue, which would be to be in relation with this life that actually gives us being, gives us existence. How do you relate to that? Because an expression of this same energy, the same life, is our capacity to think and our capacity to objectify to some extent. That's just what we've been describing. But it has to be integrated into this larger reality, which is our, if you like, deeper identity. And for us to foster the illusion that somehow or another we're separate, that we're in control, and that our identity consists in our knowledge, which is really what we've been skirting around in a whole lot of ways, that's the illusion. Somebody defined Western civilization as the illusion of limited control.
Yeah, but it's not even limited control, really, because we're saying that life lives us. So then, and then we do this virtual thing where we put our attention on that, and life is living that stuff too, right?
Sure.
But I mean, we're just saying everything that we said, that we'd have a right attitude, that we would be listening, that we would, we'd have a good intention, all those things. If we can have some small sense of that life lives us, my God, we're in the unknown, we're in the not knowing, we're respecting every living being, and especially the guy we're in front of talking to, and all those things that we said, our intentions and our listening skills and everything just go explode into being huge, I mean, because we're alive, we're riveted right there to be with life.
So there would be the ideal, and hopefully say life would come in and we have a magic wand and we would get that. And then we would apply these things that we were talking about, like intention and skills and so forth. But for most of us, and I think it's a valid, at least a valid approach, by attempting even to hone our intention and to cultivate our attitudes and to practice a couple of these little skills, I think it actually serves in expanding our awareness. Expanding this awareness that life lives us. So it kind of maybe works both ways, is maybe what I've found in my life,
For me, it just seems like it's so worthwhile and so useful to just work the conversation around the way we just did, and then finally come out and I start talking about virtual this and virtual that, and you say, well, of course it can't be right, because how can a virtual life make a body work and, make the universe work and make the seasons work and the planet go around the sun and all those things? I mean, life is doing all those things. And so I think that we have to work for me, it would be so useful to work the conversation around that people would really realize that there is a big mystery out there and that life is living us and that we're doing a virtual world and it's okay. But it's
Mhm.
not really hooked to the raw material very much. It's only hooked to what we used to think yesterday and what our grandfathers used to think, you
Yeah.
know. And then however that started, who cares? I mean, that's just it's all the same thought that says, oh, there's a whole train of people thinking and passing this stuff on. But basically, it's impersonal. First of all, that's the most important thing. You're not at fault. You're not guilty. And you're not a victim.
That's a very
These are
sort
huge
of
things. And
perspective.
then all that virtual world can unfold and be participated in, too, because we don't want to participate in the virtual world because we got so many people have the idea that they're doing it, they control it, they're manipulating us, and they're too big, and we don't count in that virtual world, and it's a bad virtual world. I mean, revolutionaries, they're trying to pull down the virtual world and blow it up, and then just
Mhm.
say, let it start from scratch again. It would be better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, that's another kind of expression of the virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. The virtual world, that's the trouble with the virtual world. See, it can get into really these cul-de-sacs.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
think, oh, no, I'm in a real place, and I've got to fight for my life here.
Yeah.
And, I don't know.
Mhm.
That's
Well,
what I want to do
there's
is,
maybe there's a very special role. I can kind of hear it coming again in the side here as we speak for the artists. Because at some level they're almost like the shamans. They're in touch with this deeper thing that we're calling life that lives us. I think an artist, somebody says that they're so present to their own personal experience, and if they penetrate it so deeply that they touch something that's common to all of us, the way a shaman kind of does. And they pick up a word or a piece of music and they're able to share it with us, and we can hear something. We can hear something of that life that lives us, that music of the spheres. So there's a very powerful role, it seems to me, for artists. Last night I went in to New York City to listen to a group called Musica Sacra, sacred music. Well, it was a delight to sit there to feel your, whatever we call it, spirit, soul, nurtured by beautiful music that ranged from Beethoven to Duke Ellington. Powerful, just to hear these wonderful voices singing. It seems to me that there's a very special role for artists to nurture that peace in us. Isn't that true?
yeah, it's very true. We get into, we're talking to certain artists and we're actually participating with them. And, but I mean, I have to say that's my goal, for this whole Never Not Here, for everything that I do. My goal is that we're all artists. We're all,
Well,
and
that's
the
true.
art of, and we're doing it through dialogue right now. And I don't know if there's a better way or another way, if we should go to dance or we should go to partying, I don't know what, somehow respecting each other. But, just talking about this life that lives us and that we really don't know about and that we're we're kind of willing to spin a lot of concepts about, and whether it's helpful or not to know that life that lives us, and if there's a way, it's said. I mean, I think there's testimony that you can know that life, but not
Yeah,
necessarily in words. I mean, you just know it, and
yeah.
that's the
Just the way
mystery
you know
we
a
want.
person.
Yeah,
Just the way you know a person without having to know every detail of their makeup. You know them at some level. I suppose maybe knowing and loving then kind of come close together in that. When you
very
really love
much.
someone. Hmm.
Very
Hmm.
much, yeah. Knowing not in words again, knowing the mystery is very
Yeah,
close to love or is love.
yeah.
Uh,
There's a piece of our conversation, maybe this is a place to pull it together for me, is a word that has helped me kind of bridge those two aspects. The fact that life lives us and the fact that at the same time we construct, our reality, our virtual reality, as you were calling it. And that's the word deliberate. Thoreau said, I went out to the woods in order to live deliberately. And I used to be so taken by that. And I'm saying, well, there's something very human about that. I don't know. I really don't. But you know what? I can deliberately try. I can put myself in the place where I'm more present to you, where I'm more present to this, where I can learn, where I can experience, where I can open myself up. So the word deliberateness sounds to me like a very bad virtue.
We could go out and we'll be deliberate for a month or so, and then we'll come back and we'll report how it worked.
Report on that. Report on your deliberateness.
That's intention, right? That's intention to let life live us, and our intention to know it in some more powerful way for us.
There is that piece, though. Again, just I find in our conversation here, we're constantly holding the two sides of this: the fact that life lives us, and, for example, the image of falling in love. Isn't it interesting that we use the term falling?
Right. That's not very deliberate, right? I mean, it could have an intention behind it, but I mean, it's like out of control, right?
There's a deliberateness, perhaps. Somebody says, you're probably not going to fall in love if you don't put yourself in the position where you meet people. So there's a certain deliberateness to it. But all you can do is, it's a little bit like, here's an analogy. This kind of process of living with life is like going on a journey, and what we do is buy the plane tickets, but we have no control of the rest of it. Yeah. So we buy the tickets and off we go. So it's a bit like that. I think we fall in love because I do believe that this life that lives us does break in and grasp us. We're grasped by the mysterious purposes of this life. And for a while, you know it yourself, whenever you fall in love with someone or fall in love with a place or are taken out of yourself. Even the word ecstasy, that's all it means. Ecstasis, to stand outside. You're taken out of this virtual world, that we've created. And for a moment, an infinite moment, you're just there. You just are. As Van Morrison used to sing, it's not why, it just is. It's not why, it just is.
For me, I think it's really important to hold both sides of the equation. Life lives us and not deny the virtual. Because I've ran into a lot of people that kind of, maybe they're not denying the virtual, but it sounds like it. And so many people that listen to them think that, oh, that's what I should do. I should be denying this world, and backing off from it. Because it's all false. It's only made up of ideas. It's only my interpretation. And then, I don't know, somehow that lack of participation is like somehow denying or passing by your life on such a impoverished basis.
That's to make like a false dichotomy. It's almost as if there's life and then there's our attempts, our virtual attempts. Well, where do these virtual attempts come from? They're also expressions of this life too.
Absolutely.
So, and for us, we can hold that as a creative tension that allows something to happen.
I love it. That's beautifully well put. I really enjoyed myself with you, Danny.
Hey, I enjoyed myself too, Richard.
Danny Martin.
It was a good conversation.
Let's see I'll distill it. When I listen to it again, we'll see what we discovered.
Yeah, well, who knows? Maybe there might be one or two little gems in there, huh?
Oh yeah, there's some gems.
Okay then.
I really thank you, and I hope we can make a relationship. I'm hoping, I've got time, and I hope you got some time, and we started. So everybody, and Danny Martin from New York, and let's welcome him back as soon as we can. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.